The sunlight felt different today, sharper, brighter. For 20 years, John had only seen it filtered through bars and thick glass. Now, stepping out of the prison gates, it felt almost unreal. His first breath of free air was a mix of car exhaust and freshly cut grass, a scent he hadn't realized he'd missed so much. But freedom felt heavy, haunted by the past. Quick, jarring flashes cut through his mind, a courtroom buzzing with whispers, the cold click of handcuffs, the judge's voice sealing his fate for a crime he didn't commit. He was a young man then, full of life. Now, graying at the temples, he clutched a small bag of belongings and faced a world he no longer recognized. He stood on a busy street corner, a ghost in a new era. People rushed past, their faces buried in glowing rectangles. Cars moved almost silently, sleek and strange. He tried to use a public phone, but there were none. He went into a coffee shop and the menu was a digital screen, the payment a tap of a card he didn't have. Every small interaction was a mountain to climb. The world had leaped forward 2 decades, leaving him stranded in the past. His hands, calloused from years of prison labor, fumbled with a smartphone his sister had given him. It felt alien, a portal to a universe he couldn't navigate. He'd scroll through pictures of nieces and nephews who were now adults, strangers with his family's eyes. Reconnecting was harder than he imagined. His sister Sarah had stood by him, her letters the only lifeline in his dark world. But now, in her house, he felt like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. He was a constant reminder of a family trauma they all wanted to forget. At a family dinner, the conversation flowed around him. They talked about apps, about streaming services, about office politics and jobs he couldn't comprehend. He tried to join in, but his stories were from a different time, a different life. The silence that followed his attempts was more painful than any argument. His own daughter, a toddler when he was taken away, was now a young woman with a life of her own. She was hesitant, polite, but distant. How could he bridge a 20-year gap of silence and pain? He was a father, yet he didn't know how to be one. Loneliness was a constant companion. He found a small apartment, furnished with second-hand items that held no memories. The nights were the worst. In prison, the noise was constant. Coughs, shouts, the clang of steel doors. Here, the silence was deafening. It gave his thoughts too much room to roam, replaying the trial, the faces of the jury, the real perpetrator who was still out there, living a life that should have been his. The bitterness was a poison he fought every day. He took a job as a janitor at a local school, working late into the night. The emptiness of the hallways mirrored his own. But there, in the quiet, a flicker of resolve began to burn. He couldn't get back the years he lost, but he could fight for his name. He could fight for the truth. This fight brought him to the office of a young, determined public defender named Maria. She worked out of a cramped office, buried under stacks of files, but her eyes held a fire that matched his own. She listened, truly listened, as John recounted every detail of his case, the inconsistencies, the overlooked evidence. Most lawyers had dismissed him, another closed case gathering dust. But Maria saw something more. She saw the truth in his tired eyes. She explained the long odds, the bureaucratic walls they would face. But for the first time in 20 years, John felt a spark of hope. He wasn't just fighting a memory anymore. He had an ally. Their investigation began in a dusty archive room in the courthouse basement. They were looking for one specific box, a needle in a haystack of forgotten cases. They spent weeks poring over brittle police reports, witness statements filled with contradictions, and blurry crime scene photos. Maria pointed out inconsistencies in the timeline, the way the original investigation seemed to fixate on John from the very beginning, ignoring other leads. For John, seeing the evidence again was like reopening a wound, but this time he wasn't alone. He was looking at it with a new purpose, not as a victim, but as an investigator. The key, they both knew, was the DNA. At his original trial in the 90s, DNA testing was in its infancy. The samples collected from the crime scene were tested with crude methods and declared inconclusive. Maria argued that with modern technology, those same samples could tell a different story. Getting the court to approve the retesting was a battle in itself. The prosecutor's office fought them at every turn, arguing that the case was closed, that they were wasting state resources. But Maria was relentless. She filed motion after motion, her voice ringing with conviction in the courtroom as she argued for John's right to prove his innocence. Finally, after months of legal wrangling, a judge granted their request. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The wait for the DNA results was agonizing. Days turned into weeks. Every phone call made John's heart leap into his throat. He tried to keep busy, to focus on his work, but the what-ifs were a constant hum in the back of his mind. What if the samples had degraded? What if the results were inconclusive again? What if this last hope was just another dead end? He and Maria would meet for coffee, going over their strategy for the hearing, but the unspoken tension was always there. This wasn't just about a legal case anymore. It was about reclaiming a life. Then the call came. Maria's voice was trembling, but steady. "We got it, John. It's a match. And it's not you." The words hung in the air, powerful enough to shatter 20 years of injustice. The DNA found at the scene matched a convicted felon who was already in the system for other crimes, someone the original police investigation had completely overlooked. The relief was so overwhelming it brought John to his knees. He didn't shout, he didn't celebrate, he just wept. Tears of anger, of sorrow for the years lost, but also, for the first time, tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The truth was finally out. The exoneration hearing was a formality, but for John it was everything. Standing in that same courtroom, he was no longer the accused. He looked at his family in the gallery, at Sarah crying openly, and at his daughter, who met his gaze with tears in her eyes and the beginning of a smile. The verdict couldn't erase the past, but it cleared the way for a future. Outside the courthouse, swarmed by reporters, John didn't speak of anger or revenge. He spoke of hope, of the importance of never giving up, and of the other innocent people still waiting for their own justice. Months later, the world was still a little strange, but it was no longer frightening. It was his. John sat on a park bench, the same park he used to play in as a boy. He was teaching his young nephew how to skip a stone across the pond. His daughter sat beside him, her arm linked through his, as they shared a quiet joke. The years of pain hadn't vanished. They were etched into his face, into the way he held himself. But they no longer defined him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. John took a deep breath, not of car exhaust, but of evening air, of blooming flowers, of life. He was no longer a prisoner, not of the state, and not of his past. For the first time in a very long time, John felt truly completely free. Thank you for watching this story of resilience and justice. If you were moved by John's journey, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that deserve to be told. See you next time.